With her bag on her back, Nike kept running. Suddenly, the clouds turned dark, and heavy rain started to fall. She didn't know where she was going. She just knew she had to leave. The streets were soon covered with water, but Nike didn't stop. Her shoes splashed in the puddles as she kept moving, her heart beating fast. She tried to wipe the rain off her face, but it kept coming, making her clothes wet and cold. Nike knew she couldn't stay in the rain forever. She looked around, unsure of where she was. The streets were almost empty, and the few people outside hurried by, with their heads down, trying to avoid the storm. As she was about to cross the road, a car came speeding out of nowhere. Before she could react, it hit her, sending her crashing to the ground. The driver, a young couple, Mr. and Mrs. Bassie, were shocked. They rushed out of the car and immediately took her to the hospital. 2 days later, Nike was discharged. The Bassies, concerned and caring, asked her about her parents. Nike's heart skipped. She remembered Lola. The image of her on the stairs flashed in her mind. She had pushed her, but she couldn't face it, so she lied. "My parents. They're gone," she whispered, her voice barely audible. The couple looked at each other, with sympathy in their eyes. Nike didn't want to go back to her father, not after what had happened. She didn't even know what would be waiting for her back at home. "Please," Nike begged, her eyes filled with tears. "I don't have anyone else. Can I stay with you?" Mrs. Bassie, moved by her desperation, placed a hand on her shoulder. "Of course, you can stay with us for as long as you need." Nike smiled, but inside, her heart raced with a strange mixture of relief and guilt. She had escaped for now, but for how long? At the Bassies' home, everything seemed perfect. The house was warm and welcoming, the couple was kind, and Nike was slowly starting to feel safe. But every night, she was haunted by the memory of that night. The look on Lola's face just before she fell. One weekend, Mrs. Bassie had to travel for a wedding. She left Nike alone with her husband, Mr. Bassie. It was supposed to be a quiet evening, but things quickly took a dark turn. Mr. Bassie came home late, drunk. His footsteps were heavy as he stumbled through the door. Nike, who had been quietly sitting in the living room, could feel the tension rise the moment he entered. He looked at her in a way that made her skin crawl. His eyes lingered too long. They were filled with something unsettling. Nike tried to keep her distance, with hopes he would just go to bed and leave her alone. But he didn't. Without warning, he staggered toward her, his face twisted in a drunken haze. Before she could react, he grabbed her roughly by the arm and pushed her against the wall. She tried to push him away, but he was too strong. Nike cried out, but there was no one to hear. In that horrible moment, Mr. Bassie overpowered her. That night, as she sat on her bed, tears streamed down her face, and she whispered to herself, "All men are the same. All of them." The words felt bitter on her tongue, but in that moment, she believed them. The next morning, Mr. Bassie acted as if nothing had happened. He left for work without a second glance. Nike was alone in the house. She knew she couldn't stay there any longer. When he was gone, she entered his bedroom, her hands shaking. She searched through his things and found his phone and some cash hidden in a drawer. Without thinking twice, she grabbed both and stuffed them into her pocket. Nike left the house. Her mind was filled with one thought: escape. She reached into her pocket and pulled out a crumpled business card. A card she had been given by a woman named Madam Adebisi. The woman had approached her once and offered help if she ever needed it. Back then, Nike hadn't thought much of it, but now, she clung to it like a lifeline. She dialed the number, gave her the address, and Madam Adebisi sent her driver to pick her up. When they arrived at Madam Adebisi's estate, Nike's anxiety only deepened. The house was massive. Madam Adebisi greeted Nike with a warm smile, but there was something calculating in her eyes. She welcomed Nike with open arms, offering her food, a place to stay, and, most importantly, protection. She asked Nike what she wanted. Nike replied that she wanted to go back to school since she was already 18 years old, and she also wanted her mother, who was in the village, to move to the city. Madam Adebisi promised to help her. But as the days went on, Nike couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. Among the girls, some were visibly pregnant. The girls in the house rarely spoke, and those who did, whispered about strange things. Debts, secrets, and mysterious business deals that Madam Adebisi managed. That night, Nike overheard a conversation between Madam Adebisi and a man she had never seen before. They spoke about her as if she was just part of a larger plan. The man brought 3 beautiful women to Madam Adebisi, who asked each of them what they wanted, just like she had done with Nike. The girls were excited and happy, but they had no idea they were stepping into something dangerous. Madam Adebisi made sure that all the girls with her were very beautiful. She selected them from different parts of Nigeria. To avoid drawing attention to her secret deals, she built her estate on the outskirts of Lagos and enrolled the girls in her private school, where they were taught to read and communicate well, as most of them were uneducated and came from poor backgrounds. They learned how to dress, speak, and walk properly. There was also a clinic inside the estate for their care. Nike and the other girls were enrolled in the school. Nike promised herself that this time, she would study hard and get good grades. The next day, Nike was shocked when she opened the door and saw her mother standing with Madam Adebisi by her side. She couldn't believe it. Her mother explained that Madam Adebisi had reached out to her and had given her a place to stay. Nike's mother did not bother to ask how Nike got to know about Madam Adebisi. All she cared about was that she had finally left the village. Nike was so happy that she promised Madam Adebisi she would do anything she asked. But what Nike didn't know was that Madam Adebisi was preparing her for something she never imagined. Madam Adebisi whispered to her that she had promised to take care of her, but in return, Nike had to follow her instructions to pay for both her bills and her mother's. Nike agreed, but pleaded with Madam Adebisi not to let her mother know about their deal. 1 week later, Nike woke up from sleep and started throwing up. Could I be sick? She wondered. She had been feeling unusually tired lately, but brushed it off as stress from school. After dressing, she went to class as usual. After school, Nike decided to see a doctor. When the doctor delivered the news that she was pregnant, she was shocked. Tears filled her eyes, as the memory of Mr. Bassie and what he had done to her came rushing back. She was now carrying his child, and she had no idea what to do. What if Madam Adebisi finds out? What will happen? She wondered. Back at Madam Adebisi's house, Nike tried to keep her pregnancy a secret, but it didn't take long for Madam Adebisi to find out, as the doctor would have told her. One morning, Madam Adebisi confronted her. She was very angry. Is it true, Nike? Are you pregnant? She demanded. Nike nodded. She was unable to speak. Madam Adebisi's face twisted in anger. How could you be so careless? I took you in, I helped you, and now this? Do you know what this means? You and your mother will have to leave. I won't have this kind of trouble under my roof, she said. Nike's heart raced with fear. She knew if they were thrown out, they had nowhere to go. She fell to her knees, her voice shaking. Please, Madam Adebisi, don't throw us out. I'll do anything. Just give me some time to figure things out. Please don't make us leave. Madam Adebisi paced back and forth, clearly thinking about the situation. Then, her expression suddenly changed. A cold smile appeared on her face as she remembered one of her richest clients, Mr. Muka. He was always searching for what he wanted and often asked her if she had pregnant girls. Maybe she thought this could work in her favor. She looked at Nike. There might be a way to fix this, she said, her tone calmer now but with an edge of something darker. But you'll need to cooperate. Nike looked up, confused and desperate. What do you mean? Don't worry. I will let you know when the time is right, she said. That night, Nike's mother got dressed and left with a man who was waiting outside. When Nike asked where she was going, her mother just said she needed some fresh air. This became a routine. Every night, Nike's mother would dress up and go out. 3 months later, Madam Adebisi called Nike and the other girls together. After school today, she instructed, the 5 of you are going somewhere together. You'll be going to Chief Maduka's house. He's having a small party, and he's hired you girls to serve his guests. Among the 5 girls Madam Adebisi selected were 3 pregnant girls, including Nike. Nike stood quietly, lost in thought. She wondered why anyone would want to hire pregnant girls like them. It didn't make sense. The more she thought about it, the more suspicious it seemed. Something felt off. Despite her worries, she agreed. After school, she met with the others, and together they went to Chief Maduka's mansion. The house was grand. As soon as they entered the gate, each girl was handed a glass of water to drink. The other girls drank theirs, but Nike, who wasn't comfortable, quickly threw hers away when no one was watching. Suddenly, the man who had given them the water transformed into a creature that was half snake, half human. The other girls became hypnotized. They stared at the man with love in their eyes. Nike was shocked and confused about what was happening. Mr. Maduka noticed that Nike wasn't behaving like the other girls, who were gazing at him lovingly. His face darkened with anger. For her safety, Nike quickly pretended to act like the others. They were all led inside the mansion, where Mr. Maduka changed back into his human form. Each girl was shown to her room. Nike, still in shock, watched as the other girls seemed happy and relaxed, completely unaware of the danger they were in. That night, Mr. Maduka made the girls repeat some strange words, including Nike, who was too afraid to refuse. When the ceremony ended, he told them they were now his wives. Nike stood frozen in disbelief, while the other girls were smiling, clearly happy about it. Nike felt lost. She didn't know where to turn or who to ask for help. Their phones had been taken as soon as they entered the mansion. Mr. Maduka then informed them that each night, one of them would visit his room. That night, a girl named Tulu was chosen and entered Mr. Maduka's room. The next morning, Nike was stunned when she saw that Tulu's stomach had grown very large, as though she were 9 months pregnant. Later that evening, Tulu acted like she was in labor and gave birth to a snake. 20 minutes later, one of the housemaids quietly told Nike that Tulu had passed away. Nike's eyes widened in horror. This can't be happening, she thought to herself. Desperate, she tried to talk to the other girls, but they seemed indifferent, as if they were completely under Mr. Maduka's spell. Just like with Tulu, the same thing happened to the second and third girls. Finally, only the last girl Titi and Nike were left. Nike was terrified and didn't know what to do, especially since the other girl seemed unaware of what was happening. She was exhausted. She hadn't slept for days, and being pregnant made things even harder. As she tried to figure out what to do, she suddenly fell asleep from exhaustion. She woke up to a scream from behind the door. It was Titi. What's happening? She wondered, unsure whether to run or find out what was going on. Unable to resist, she opened the door slightly and looked inside. She was surprised at what she saw. There, in the middle of the room, Titi was looking scared. But what terrified Nike was what she saw next. Mr. Maduka's manhood had turned into a large snake. Nike's heart raced as she realized she had stumbled upon something far more dangerous than she had ever imagined. Chief Maduka hadn't noticed her yet, but the moment the door creaked open, he turned in shock, locking eyes with Nike. His face twisted in anger, and in a flash he started chasing Nike. "Nike!" he bellowed, his voice full of rage. He tried to force the snake back inside him, but the creature resisted. Nike didn't wait. She ran faster than she thought possible. She knew she had to escape. She could hear Chief Maduka behind her as she ran outside. What had she just witnessed? And what would happen now that she had escaped? Nike had no idea where to go, but one thing was certain. She had just crossed into a world far more dangerous than she had ever imagined. As Nike hurried across the road, she didn't pay much attention to the oncoming traffic. Suddenly, the screech of tires jolted her, and she froze. A flashy, expensive car came to a sudden stop, just inches away from hitting her. The driver angrily stepped out of the car, his voice rising. "Are you blind? You could have gotten yourself killed." Nike, shaken, turned to face him, and her breath caught in her throat. It was Chike, her former classmate from school. He looked different now, more handsome than she remembered, his presence commanding. For a moment, Nike couldn't believe it. Chike's expression shifted the moment he recognized her. Nike? He had always noticed her beauty back in school, the way she caught everyone's attention with her striking looks. He had admired her from afar, but he'd kept his feelings hidden, always acting indifferent. But now, as he stood there, he saw something unexpected. Nike was pregnant, her face tired, and her once bright eyes looked weary. Chike's anger faded, replaced by shock and confusion. "What happened to you, Nike?" he asked, his voice softening, his mind racing with questions. Chike took Nike home after nearly hitting her with his car. He cared for her, gave her food, and made sure she rested very well. Once she felt better, Nike shared her tragic story. "Growing up, my family was everything to me," she said. "My parents were in love and we had this perfect life together, or so I thought. But one day my father just betrayed us. He sent my mother away to the village, as if she meant nothing. I tried to hold things together, but then he started bringing other women into our home. First, there was Amina, who acted as if she belonged there, sitting in my mother's chair, cooking in her kitchen. And then, after some time, he brought Lola, a girl almost my age. Couldn't believe it. The anger inside me just kept growing. At school, I stopped caring about my studies and began stirring up trouble just to feel noticed. Nothing seemed to make sense anymore. But everything changed one afternoon. I came home and found Lola in my mother's clothes, the dress my dad had bought her for her birthday. I could hardly breathe. My mind went blank with anger. I confronted her, told her to get out of my room, but she just brushed me off, laughing like it was all a joke. As she tried to walk past me, something snapped inside of me, and I pushed her. The next few seconds felt like a nightmare in slow motion. Lola lost her balance, stumbling backward as she tried to grab the railing. But her hand slipped, and she tumbled down the stairs. I just stood there, frozen. I couldn't move, couldn't even breathe. All I could think was that I'd hurt her, maybe even killed her. The way her body lay at the bottom of the stairs. For a moment, I thought she was dead. My hands were shaking. My heart felt like it would burst. I wanted to run to her, but I couldn't bring myself to move. I kept seeing my mother's face in my mind, feeling like I had somehow destroyed whatever was left of our family. The guilt, the fear, it was like being trapped underwater. I hated my father for what he'd done to us, for tearing apart the family we once had. But at that moment I hated myself too. I had let my anger take over, and now nothing would ever be the same. I don't know if I'll ever be free of the pain and anger that have been eating away at me. And I don't know if I'll ever be able to forgive myself for what happened that day. She told Chike about Mr. Bassie, her pregnancy, and how she ended up with Madam Adebisi. Chike, moved by her story, promised to help her despite Nike's initial hesitation. As they talked and laughed about old times, Nike asked how Chike had become so wealthy. He explained that he inherited and grew his grandfather's business after turning 18. Though Nike felt comforted, she couldn't shake the feeling that more challenges might lie ahead. Chike dropped Nike off at Madam Adebisi's house. As they both entered, Nike was shocked to see her father, her mother, and Lola, the woman she had pushed down the stairs, all in Madam Adebisi's living room. Could Lola have survived? She wondered. Lola confessed to Nike that she had been paid by Madam Adebisi to start a relationship with Nike's father and make Nike's life difficult. All to force her to leave home and come to Madam Adebisi for help. Madam Adebisi had noticed how beautiful Nike was and wanted to use her for her own selfish gain. Nike's mother also confessed that Madam Adebisi had threatened to throw both her and Nike out of their home unless she followed her rules, which included dating different men. Nike was stunned. How could Madam Adebisi do this to them? She thought. Madam Adebisi was equally surprised to see Nike alive. She quickly tried to call Chief Muka to figure out what had gone wrong, but he wasn't answering. How could Nike still be alive after the plan with Mr. Muka? She wondered. They had planned on using the girls for sacrifice, but their plans failed. When Nike's father saw her, he was overwhelmed with emotion. He started crying and begged for her forgiveness, admitting that he had failed her as a father. He promised to make things right. He also asked Nike's mother for forgiveness, acknowledging the pain he had caused their family. As they were still discussing, Titi, the last girl who was with Nike in Mr. Muka's house, entered. She was alive, and Nike felt a wave of relief and joy. Titi explained how Mr. Muka was swallowed by his own snake and how she had narrowly escaped the house. Nike was overjoyed that nothing bad happened to Titi and that Lola had survived the fall. In the end, Madam Adebisi was arrested and sent to prison thanks to Chike. A few months later, Nike gave birth to a beautiful baby girl. She returned to school to finish her education, and Chike was always there to support her. Nike's father and mother also reunited. He vowed never to allow any strange woman into his home. Moral lesson. Even though Nike faced many problems, she didn't give up. She stayed strong and kept trying to make her life better. This shows how important it is to never lose hope. Be careful who you trust. Madam Adebisi seemed kind but had bad intentions. The story teaches us to be careful about trusting people, especially when things seem too good to be true. Thanks for watching. Please like, subscribe, and hit the notification bell. I hope you enjoyed the story. To all my returning subscribers, thank you for your amazing support. And if you're new here, welcome to the channel. Share your thoughts on the story in the comments, and let us know where you're watching from. Stay tuned. I love you all. Special African Tales.